justice-loving, community-loving community. So maybe you found out about this event through our Instagram, maybe an email, maybe through other folks who share this event, maybe through Breaking the Silence. However you landed here, we are so glad that you made it. I'm just going to go over a few logistics, then we're going to get this thing started. How's that sound? Great. That's right. So we have a awesome program planned for you tonight. And you should feel free to do what you need to do during this event. We're starting a little late. Maybe you got to leave right at 8. You got to leave right at 8. That's totally fine. You can exit when you need to exit. I hope you stay for the whole thing. We're gonna have a juicy conversation and Q&A at the end. We've got lots of snacks over here and drinks. If you need just like plain water, it's inside this lit up building that you saw when you came in, and that's also where the bathrooms are. They're all gender neutral bathrooms. There's plenty of them. Do what you gotta do during this event. If you have a question about where something is, water, bathrooms, you can find me or Shay, who is at the front checking people in still, but we'll put on name tags. That's what you need to know about that. In case of an emergency, the way to get out is the way you came in. Hopefully we're all good. And I just wanted to go over a few more things, which is some community agreements. This is a really cool, special, unique event. And it's an event that might bring up some tension in your body, some feelings, and we invite all of that in. Bring your feelings in, and we're so excited to have our guests here, and we're really here to do some listening. So our community agreements tonight are really just like, I'm gonna show up with an open heart, and I'm here to listen. If you feel like you're showing up here tonight with an open heart and you're here to listen, just give me a thumbs up. Cool. If you're like, ooh, I'm feeling something, I need to talk about it right now. It's not the time to be talking, you should come find me. I love to talk about all this stuff, and sometimes that's a need. I'm really here for that. We're gonna do Q&A at the end, and we're gonna ask that folks write down their questions actually, because there's gonna be a ton of them. We're gonna bring them to the front, and they're gonna move through the questions. You have a little piece of paper on your seat you can write down. I'm gonna pass around pens, so maybe while we're listening, we're watching some stuff, you might have a question that comes up. You should write it down. I'm gonna pass these around, grab a pen, hold on to it, and write your questions down. You can write more than one question on your card if you've got one. And what else? Let me check my notes.
You want it?
Oh, we're gonna have a little opportunity to talk with each other too, and I just invite you all to speak from the eye, speak from your own experience, instead of saying like, all Israelis, or all the Jews, or everyone in LA is, or feels, or thinks. You can say, I think, or I feel, or I've experienced. Your experience is true and real, and we invite you to bring that in. But we just don't want to make any generalizations tonight. So if you're cool with speaking from your own experience, speaking from the eye, just give me a thumbs up. We're all good with that? Cool. That was the whole thing. That's my spiel. I'm going to pass it over to our amazing guests, Maya and Bensi, who are going to introduce themselves, and then we'll just get rolling.
Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome our guests. Let's go.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Shay. Thank you, JCC community for having us. It really means a lot. My name is Bensi Sanders. I served in the IDF between the years 2012 to 2015 in a Special Forces reconnaissance unit. Then for a few years after that, I served in the reserves, also in the same type of unit. You can maybe already detect in my accent, I wasn't born in Israel, I wasn't raised in Israel, and you might be able to tell from my hat that I'm from New York. And basically, the way that I went from, I grew up in an Orthodox community in New York, went to Jewish private schools my whole life, and how I went from being an Orthodox kid growing up in New York to being in the IDF Special Forces is basically this kind of transition that I went through. Right after I graduated high school, I went on a gap year program. I went to study in yeshiva, basically with my entire graduating class, and I had this kind of transformative experience, really delving into Jewish texts, Jewish tradition, starting to also live in Israel, travel, meet people, meet relatives who I hadn't met, and I started feeling like the creation of the state of Israel and its continued existence was this really miraculous and extremely significant, both from a religious Jewish perspective and also just from a historical perspective of peoplehood. And I felt like an obligation to stay and to be part of it, to participate in it. Within a few months, I decided I'm going to make Aliyah, I'm going to become an Israeli citizen, I'm going to immigrate. And I continued to learn in yeshiva for a number of other years. I knew that taking on citizenship meant I would have to serve in the IDF, like all Israeli citizens are required to. And that was something I saw as really a privilege and an honor to be able to do, because everything that I was experiencing and was so meaningful to me, I knew was only possible because Israel has such a strong military that has stood time and time again against invading armies, and in more recent years has stood up against these horrific terrorist attacks in cafes and on buses. And so I really considered it to be a privilege to be able to contribute, and I wanted to do that in the most meaningful way I could. And so when I was drafted into the IDF, I was drafted into an infantry unit. I pushed myself and I tried out for the Special Forces unit. I was accepted. I was really thrilled to have the opportunity to do that. I began basically a lengthy training of 14 months. It's like around twice as long as the typical infantry training. As a reconnaissance unit, you learn how to do a lot of really advanced navigation training, like to be able to go in front of a larger military force and be able to detect exactly where the enemy is while they can't detect you, and be able to direct artillery strikes and airstrikes at enemy, military formations. I did that again for 14 months until we completed our service. We had this graduation ceremony, and I joined the active unit, and we got our first assignment. Our first assignment was to be sent, I have some pictures of me. I see it's not super clear, but you can probably make it out, but I promise you that's me. Our first assignment was to be sent to the West Bank. We were told we were going to be sent to the northern West Bank for 8 months. This was in the end of 2013. I did spend 8 months in the West Bank. After that, this picture on the left, that's me on a mountain called Mount Ebal, right outside of the Palestinian city of Nablus. And then after 8 months, there was a major escalation in the West Bank, which led to a ground incursion into the Gaza Strip. I was also participated in that. That is a photograph of me from July 2014, right before I went inside the Gaza Strip. Now, I want to jump to the next slide and show a map. And again, I see it's like not so clear, but this is a map of the West Bank. This is our first assignment. And I want to just share a few kind of anecdotes from my time there, and just kind of very briefly paint a picture that I think will be helpful for later on when we look at the film, to kind of understand the context in which what we see and what we discuss is taking place. So we were assigned to go to this area for 8 months into the West Bank. West Bank is this area that was captured by Israel in 1967. Israel has since 1967 administered a military regime over the Palestinian population in this territory. Today, we're talking about around 2.7 million Palestinians in the West Bank. In the Gaza Strip, which was captured also from Egypt, there's 2 million Palestinians. Unlike the Gaza Strip today, the West Bank, since the early years after 1967, Israel has built settlements and basically allowed for its own civilians to move into that territory and establish a few hundred settlements. Today there's close to 500,000 Israeli citizens living amongst the Palestinian population, really scattered throughout that West Bank. And our role when we were being sent into the West Bank, the main job we were told that we're supposed to do is to provide security for those Israeli settlers living around the Palestinians in that territory. And basically we were told that this assignment, this is called in Hebrew bitachon shotef. This is a routine security assignment. We had done 14 months of training for specialized military warfare, and they basically told us most of this training that you did is not relevant for this assignment. In fact, we're going to give you kind of like a few days of like a crash course in how to do routine security. And during those few days, we were taught for the first time kind of how to do patrols in armored jeeps. We actually didn't even use this type of jeep during our training. We used like these Humvees, which are very good for open terrain, and we were given like these Land Rover Defenders with heavy, armor. And we were told we're supposed to just drive around in the streets 24/7. We have a couple of different jeeps with soldiers in them, just driving around, and the purpose is to be seen. First, they would tell us specifically in the orders, the goal is to be seen by the Israeli civilians there. And the term in Hebrew they use is to give them tchushat bitachon. In Hebrew, this means a sense of security. They're supposed to see the IDF soldiers and they're supposed to feel safe. We also were supposed to be seen by the Palestinians. And the terminology that our officers would use to describe why we want to be seen by the Palestinians is to remind them who's controlling them. To remind the Palestinians in the area that the IDF is in control of their lives. In fact, one of my commanding officers, he used the term in Hebrew, balabayit, to remind the Palestinians who is the landlord, who owns the place. And in order to do that, it wasn't enough just to drive around, but also we were supposed to go on some of the main roads leading in and out of the Palestinian city of Nablus, and we're supposed to set up what's called a flying checkpoint. This means we would have this kit with like some tire spikes and a big kind of cone with a stop sign on it, and we were supposed to just stop cars. We weren't looking for anything in particular, but we were there to just kind of make our presence felt. Another thing that we learned how to do for the first time is we were told that in this area that I was in, there was a small Palestinian village just a few kilometers to the west of Nablus. Nablus is one of the biggest cities in the West Bank. And basically, Israel, after 1967, they built a settlement right in between the village and the city. And again, many years before I was deployed there, the IDF decided they were going to close the road, the main road leading out of the village, connecting it to the city, because it went adjacent to the settlement. And the Palestinians obviously were very inconvenienced by this, so they started doing a protest march. Every Friday, they would try to march on the road that the IDF had closed off to them. And so every Friday, we would meet these protesters marching on the road, and we were taught how to use tear gas, again, for the first time before this deployment. We were also taught how to use what's called rubber-coated bullets. We were given sometimes authorization to use against what's called the central or primary instigator of the protest. And it was always like this kind of confrontation where, we would go and we would fire tear gas at the protesters would throw rocks at us. We would then fire these rubber-coated bullets at the central instigator of the protest. Another thing that we learned how to do and that we did day in, day out during this time is we were supposed to enforce the perimeters, restricting Palestinian movement around the settlements. And this is true about, every settlement in the West Bank. There are areas, sometimes there's a fence around the settlement, but very often there's no fence. There's something called red lines around the settlement, and there's no physical demarcation around the settlement. There's just a map that we have and the civilian security team inside the settlement has, and there's an operations room that is hooked up to a whole network of cameras, and those cameras are constantly surveilling all of the land in between the settlement and the nearby village. In the settlement of Kedumim, where I was stationed, there are 5 different villages that kind of were adjacent to the settlement, and they would be constantly monitoring what were designated as the red lines. And if any Palestinian would, wander in the fields or the olive groves beyond and cross those red lines, they would immediately call the IDF unit that I was serving in, and we would always have a rapid response team ready with our gear on, our vests and our helmets and our knee pads, and we would jump into a Jeep and drive to intercept them. And I remember one time that I was on this rapid response team. We get a call saying there are 2 Palestinians in this area that have crossed the red line. We jump into our Jeep, we drive as quickly as we can. We get to the point we're being, kind of guided to, and we run out of the Jeep, we run into the olive grove, and we find 2 Palestinians. It's a man and a woman. They're maybe 50 years old, I would say. They're kind of bent over like these bushes that are growing in the field, in between the olive trees, and they're picking leaves off of these bushes, and they're filling up the bag with the leaves. We feel like there's not really any threat, but we're told they're not allowed to be there. Basically, in the operations room, they're adamant with us that if they don't leave immediately, doesn't matter what they're doing, they're not allowed to be there. If they don't leave immediately, you have to arrest them. I think at this point, you might be able to gather that at this point, during these many months of carrying out these daily activities, for me, reflecting on these experiences, I began to realize that there was a very wide gap between kind of the way I perceived and I was motivated to join the IDF to defend Israel from these invading armies or these horrific terrorist attacks, to kind of the day-to-day routine of what I was being asked to do. And that gap kind of grew and grew as I reflected on it also in the years after my service, and led me to joining an organization called Breaking the Silence. Breaking the Silence is an organization of IDF veterans. Was founded by a group of IDF veterans who served in the Second Intifada, really at the height of all of the bloodshed at that time in the early 2000s. They served inside the city of Hebron, and they had this experience of carrying out all sorts of military, participating in all sorts of military operations. Sometimes reading about those very operations in the news, hearing about them on the radio, discussing with their family, and they felt that there was this gap between the way the public, even sometimes their own friends and family, perceived or was being informed about their things that they did with their own, with their own hands and their own flesh and blood, and the way it was being described. And so they decided, as an organic unit, a group of 60 soldiers all together, decided that they were going to get a gallery space in Tel Aviv, and they were going to, put on display a bunch of photos and a bunch of videos they had collected from their service. They called the exhibit Bringing Hebron to Tel Aviv, Breaking the Silence. This exhibit really got a lot of attention. It garnered a lot of attention, as the word spread, more and more people started coming, thousands of people came. It was one of the most visited exhibitions in the entire country in 2004. And the most significant thing that happened during this time that they had opened up this exhibit was that they met other soldiers. This was a group from the Nahal 50th Battalion, a specific unit who served in Hebron during a specific time. They would meet soldiers from the Golani Brigade, from the Armored Corps, from the Artillery Corps, soldiers who served in the Gaza Strip, who served in the northern West Bank, around Jenin and Ramallah. And they started exchanging their stories and their experiences. What they quickly decided after this exhibit closed eventually was that they want to continue to bring these people in and to collect their testimonies, to hear their voices. And they started printing booklets of testimonies that they had verified. They started taking people on tours into the occupied territories, into the West Bank, to see this reality for themselves. And they continued to be politically active and call for an end of military occupation over millions of Palestinians who have no representation in Israel, and this is being carried out against their wills in a way that really was unacceptable to them. To date, Breaking the Silence has collected testimonies from around 1,400 IDF veterans, slightly less than 1,400. We're interviewing on average every week a newly released IDF soldier. We're verifying and publishing those testimonies. We're taking thousands of people. We're one of the most active anti-occupation organizations in the country. And today we're kind of here to, we're also in a moment I'm going to introduce my colleague and fellow testifier, Maya Eshel, who's going to talk about her experiences, but also going to talk about one of the most pressing issues that we have kind of highlighted in recent, over the past year and even a little bit before, in an area called Masaf Riyata. This is a region in the southern tip of the West Bank, where there are a number of fairly impoverished Palestinian villages that are being threatened with forced expulsion. Just before I hand over to Maya, I want to just do a quick overview of what I mean when I say Area C. Without getting into too much of the nitty-gritty, Israel began a negotiation process with the Palestinians in the 90s, and a body was created called the Palestinian Authority that was given limited autonomy over a small portion of the West Bank, which is called Area A and Area B. And Israel retained absolute control over all of the West Bank, but in Area C, which is 61% of the West Bank, it's exclusive. That means the Palestinian Authority, which is basically, they have certain limited authority over kind of mostly densely populated urban areas like the cities of Ramallah and Jenin and Bethlehem. The IDF goes into those cities for military activities really whenever they want. As a matter of fact, earlier this year, I described these flying checkpoints that are carried out kind of on a regular basis. Sometimes those flying checkpoints are carried out within the area that's under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority. They don't need any permission, they don't need to ask anyone. And actually, kind of very unfortunately, in one of these cases where Israeli soldiers were opening a flying checkpoint, they stopped in between two villages located inside of Area A. They stopped the Palestinian car in the middle of the night. An elderly Palestinian American man named Omar Assad was driving in the car. He didn't have his ID with him, so the soldiers pulled him out of his car, handcuffed him, blindfolded him, and kind of left him out in the cold, and he died of exposure. This is obviously an example. He's from Wisconsin, a U.S. citizen. It created a little bit of a stir. Most cases when there are these flying checkpoints, obviously nobody is killed, but also you never hear about them. And even if somebody is killed, if they're not a U.S. citizen or they're not a prominent individual, it's likely not to really make international headlines. So that's just a brief overview of areas A, B, and C. Just one last thing about Area C. Area C is under exclusive Israeli control. That means the Israeli government and the Israeli military has absolute control over all aspects of Palestinian civilian development in those areas. There are around 300,000 Palestinians living in this area. Maya is an activist who's working in that area in addition to being a Breaking the Silence testifier, and I will let her speak about that. And then afterwards, we're going to have a little break, and then we're going to view a short documentary about what's going on in that territory.
Hi. Thanks, Betsy, for the introduction. Nice to speak with you today. I'll speak up. Yeah. Okay, so hi, my name is Maya Eshel. I'm 27 years old. I'm also originally from New York. I was raised on Long Island by an Israeli father and an American mother. I was raised in a super Israeli-American community. Everyone knew that one day maybe she will join the military, but it was like a big question mark. And then when I was 16 in 2011, my parents decided to pick us up and move us to Tel Aviv, Givatayim, this area in in the center of Israel. And I didn't speak Hebrew. I didn't understand the culture. I didn't really know what was going around me, but what I did understand was that in order to feel like an Israeli, in order to be a part of something bigger than myself and to have this ticket into the Israeli society, I needed to join the military, and I needed to be a part of this thing that was bigger than myself, and that my parents wanted me to join, all my friends wanted me to join. Of course, it wasn't an option. I made Aliyah. I was a citizen. So I was recruited in 2014, sorry. as a mashakitash, which is basically a human resources non-commissioning officer. My job was basically to see the human behind the madim, behind the uniform. Thank you. I was supposed to be that empathetic officer on base that saw soldiers who were coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds, people who were immigrants like myself at the time, people who have family members who are have medical conditions that require them to be home more than other soldiers. And so I was really that person that people went to when they had problems, and I was that person who wanted to see people as human beings and support them through whatever they were going through at the time in the military. And in 2015, I started serving in the south of the country, and in 2015 I moved to this space called Khatmar Zion, the Etzion Brigade. It was in Judea and Samaria, which today I know is the West Bank, but back then I called it Judea and Samaria. It's about 20 minutes south of Jerusalem, and it's towards the southern part of the West Bank. On that base, there's a detention center. It's kind of like the first thing I found out when I got to this place. And I want to actually take it back for a second. Going to this base, I understood that I was entering this territory, this land where a lot of Arabs were living. And my mother specifically was really, really, really nervous for me. She wanted me to go on this armored bus and to be extra careful and not talk to anyone that I didn't have to speak with. And I was myself a bit nervous, but I didn't really know what I was walking into, so it all kind of was exciting and scary at the same time. I get to the base, I hear there's this detention center in the corner of the base, at the bottom of this hill, all the way on the side, and I understand from my friends that I'm starting to meet that, like, it's kind of this thing to experience. You want to go check out the detention center, see these detainees. And I did get used to seeing Palestinians being walked in and into the base. People were blindfolded and had their hands cuffed behind their backs. And it was just like, again, it was just something that I saw all the time and got used to. And one day I was sitting at the clinic, there's a clinic on every base, and I'm sitting there waiting to go see the doctor, and in walks a small Palestinian boy, a detainee, and in walks... Testing. Oh. Hello? You hear me? It's better. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, better. Okay. I hope you got pieces of the beginning. That's okay. So I'm at the clinic on the base. And in walks a small Palestinian boy, could have been anything between 8 to 12 years old, blindfolded and handcuffed with his hands behind his back. And he's being walked in by this very intimidating officer that I knew personally and was also personally afraid of. And I'm sitting down, and they come up to me, and this kid is just a few centimeters taller than me while I'm sitting down. And to be honest, although he was blindfolded, I was really, really afraid. He was looking at me blindfolded, and all I can think of is can he see my face? Can he see through the fabric? Does he know who I am? Is he gonna find me afterwards? What did he do if the most moral army and the most moral military in the world is taking a child? That means he must have done something. I was genuinely nervous. And fast forward about a year, I finished my service. Fast forward a few months later, I am in an American university, looking at his schools and sitting in a classroom, and I all of a sudden hear the students talk about the military in Israel, Gaza,
and I hear the word the occupation, and I realize they're talking about something that, like, that's my experience they're talking about. I was just there. What's going on here? Why do they know all of these things that I don't know? Like, did I do something wrong? What is this? And I stopped, felt like everyone was staring at me, and I ran out of the classroom, started crying, and thinking about my service, and it just brought me back to this moment when I was sitting at the clinician's office and looking at this boy. And I realized I was only thinking about myself back then, but this time I was thinking, is this kid, was he afraid? He was alone. Where were his parents? What could he have done to put him in such a horrible situation? And I thought about all those other Palestinians who were walking on the base and going into the detention center, and those other moments I had on the base where I did go into the detention center and I did go see what the conditions were like for them, and how I had no empathy for them at all. But my job, the one thing I was supposed to do was have empathy for soldiers and for people. And so in this moment, I just realized I need to go back and look at what's happening in Israel and at the occupation, and learn and educate myself. And I made some calls, and I ended up sitting and talking with someone who worked for Breaking the Silence at the time. And about 6 months later, I decided in 2017 to give testimony and talk about my experiences in the West Bank. There's a picture of someone being detained. I think there's another slide. What's next after that, just for myself? Anyway, so I actually want to talk with y'all today about Musafiriyata. If you want to take out your booklets, on page 6 and 7, I believe.
The smaller one.
The smaller one, I'm sorry. It's the small booklet on page here. 6 and 7. In Area C, there's this area called Musafiriyata, like Bensi said earlier. There's this red line going from the top of the right page down to the bottom of the left page, and a green line going from the left all the way to the right. That is Musafiriyata. It's an area made up of 29 Palestinian villages. Because they are in Area C, controlled by the military, most of these Palestinian villages are unacknowledged by the state, which means that, like Bensi said earlier, they aren't privileged, or they're not getting water and electricity, and if they want to build infrastructure, any form of infrastructure, the civil administration, this body that works with the military, who are responsible for allowing Palestinians to have work permits or build homes, most of the time, you can see also on the page, the last page actually, you see here building statistics in Area C, settlers versus Palestinians. You can see the amount of requests for permits that Palestinians request, and how much are actually approved versus how much building settlers, how much construction is actually happening within the settlements, and like that insane gap. So I want to take you back to Musafiriyata and tell you about this village called Khair. It's a Bedouin Palestinian village that has existed before 48. Generations of Palestinians have been living on this land, but because they're an unacknowledged village, most of their infrastructure, all of their infrastructure is under threat of demolition. And right next to them, just meters away, is this beautiful, maybe not so beautiful, settlement with paved roads and buildings, and every day you hear something new being built on just meters away from you. And I want to read a testimony from that about this village. You can actually turn to this testimony. It's on page 62 in the books, yeah? So it's a testimony given by a lieutenant from the Judea Regional Brigade in Khair. I'm reading from towards the bottom of the page. The village sheikh was lying there in front of the tractor. He's a part of a unit right now going to demolish some infrastructures in Khair. The village's sheikh was lying there in front of the tractor. We had to get the border police officers to pull him away, and there was cursing and yelling. In the end, he came to us and said, do you hear tractors working in the new neighborhood in Carmel? How about that? We told him, they're building with an approved master plan. You aren't. And he says, does that seem just to you? We told him that's how it is, and you know that the neighborhood was indeed approved and it has master plans, and they are working according to the plans and everything. But that Palestinian man who lives 5 meters from their fences and is illegal according to the civil administration's definitions, that's a problem. Now, the thing is, we don't only demolish infrastructures and homes to forcibly get Palestinians off of their land. We also, in this area called the firing zone, which if you go back to the smaller booklets, you can see, I have to have all these things that I'm holding, sorry. Where is it? You can see that there is this smaller area right around here. It's circled in this green line, and half of it is filled with green, and half of it is kind of like blue spotty areas. So basically, this is called the firing zone. In the 1980s, the IDF declared 12 Palestinian villages on the land of military training zones. So from the 80s, the military is allowed to go and just have any kind of training for their soldiers. In reality, we know that this wasn't necessarily put in place for training. It was really to have more land. And so I want to read another testimony for you. It's coming from a village by a soldier who is a sergeant serving in 2019 in the West Bank. He's discussing basically his unit is doing a training, a weekly training, and his officer loses his night vision devices. And because they're in the firing zone and they're really close to these villages, there's this myth amongst the base that every time they lose something, every time something goes missing, one of the Palestinians in one of these villages steals their equipment. And what does that do? That allows them to go into this village and conduct and basically conquer the village as if they're in war. And it's the same thing that's happening in general in the firing zone, where we justify our soldiers and infantry soldiers and allow them to act as if they're at war and train on innocent Palestinian villages as if they're going into Lebanon. And so now we have this soldier, he's heading into this village called Jinba in the firing zone, and he says, we knew that we're going to look for night vision devices. But what was passed down to us, what we were briefed on, is that we're now arriving in helicopters to a Lebanese village and doing a company exercise. We go to the village on foot from 3 different directions and then conquer the village. That's what the platoon commander told everybody. Supposedly it's part of platoon training week. Yes, at that moment, honestly, I didn't think through how scarring it is for soldiers. But they talked about it later through their entire service as the day when reality and imagination collided, and then military off-road buses arrived and took us from there, and we advanced toward the target just like in a regular infantry company exercise, and then entered the village, inserted magazines, and started searching people's homes. We took them out of their houses and then searched their homes. You arrive and what happens? We get there and start going house by house and searching their caves, their storage sheds, their livestock pen. This village has two main ridges. We conquered one of them, the other 2 platoons conquered the other part. How did the Palestinians react to this? They were just in shock. Did you find anything? We found all kinds of caught random stuff. Did you find the night vision device? No, of course not. As far as I understood, it was found during weapon searches in Hebron, but that's just a rumor. Did you explain to the local residents what was happening and why it was happening? No, they didn't speak Hebrew and we didn't speak Arabic. It was very quiet. There was no resistance on their part. There was no resistance, there was no anger, and also we weren't in a situation where we were coming in full force. The soldiers were in complete shock and didn't know what they were doing. So, unfortunately, this wasn't enough to force, not unfortunately, but this wasn't enough to force Palestinians off their land. And so last year in 2020, 21, 22, in the May of 2022, on the eve of Israeli Independence Day, the Israeli Supreme Court made it legal for the IDF to go and forcibly expel all of these Palestinians living in the firing zone. That's thousands of people who have been living on this land for many, many years. And you know, the one thing that I know and I think is stopping from the IDF from coming and just wiping out this entire community is the fact that there's a really, really, really strong ecosystem of activism that has existed in Masafar Yatta for the past 20, 22 years. I can say within the past year, there are dozens of activists, international and Israeli activists, working together with Palestinian activists on the ground, going to events where there's either a demolition or military and settler violence, and we stand there, we use our presence, we use our privilege to de-escalate the situation, we document, and we try to send these videos out into the Israeli media, into international media. Thankfully, the word Masafar Yatta is well known. I have a friend in Boston who knows about Masafar Yatta, who's not connected at all, and it was very exciting and surprising. Also, we use this power and this work to try to stop arrests, or if someone is arrested, we use our lawyers and politicians to try to get them out sooner. And you know, there was an attack on Susia, a village in Masafar Yatta, and my parents knew about it because we got videos out into mainstream Israeli news broadcasting. But the thing is that this is an imminent problem. Right now, there are Palestinians preparing themselves mentally and physically to be expelled from their homes. And we need to stand with them. We all need to stand with them. Whether you talk about this here or talk about it in your communities, in your synagogues, write an op-ed about Masafar Yatta, that will make the difference and can make the difference between them being expelled or not, or the IDF going into their homes and demolishing a home or not. So I just ask you to really engage with this, because right now in Khalat al-Daba, this is one village that just a few weeks ago, the IDF got a green light to go and expel this one specific village, and I'm praying that it won't happen anytime soon. So please engage with this, and we have a really great video for you that we'll play in a bit, that really will give you a really great picture of what things look like in Masafar Yatta.
Thank you both so much for sharing your stories with us. We're just one thing I want to say up front is we forgot to put our outdoor heaters out. So we're gonna roll those out if you're cold. And if you need to warm up, there's more hot water, we're making some more coffee. But the outdoor heaters are gonna be rolled out shortly. We just didn't want to do it while our friends were speaking. But I just want to say one more time, if you're wrestling with something or you're feeling like you need a chat, I'm available to talk. Shay, who's over there, wave Shay, is available to chat. But I invite you to turn to maybe a couple people next to you, one person next to you, and introduce yourself, maybe share, why did you show up here tonight? And maybe one thing that that Benzi and Maya just shared with us that's really sitting with you on your heart. What's one thing that you're sitting with or that's really sticking out to you? We're gonna do that for 5-ish minutes while we roll out the heaters. And then we're gonna watch a little documentary video. Cool.